JANZZ.technology, the podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Laura Flamarich, and as always, I'm thrilled to explore today's topic based on one of our last white papers, Far From Home, Stories of Indonesian Migrant Workers. Joining me to unpack this episode is Hesti Aryani, our Business Development Manager for Indonesia at JANZZ. Today, we are diving into a topic that's not only professionally relevant to Hesti, but also personally meaningful for her. Indonesian migrant workers. As someone looking in from the outside, I find this subject fascinating. Hesti, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Laura.
It all started with the trend Kabur Aja Dulu. Please
yes,
help.
right. Kabur aja dulu.
Exactly, which is something like run away first.
Yes, and it's been quite a topic on social media lately that captures a kind of mindset like planning to work abroad temporarily with the hope of returning home someday, or sometimes just a strong desire to leave first and figure things out later.
And this trend is spreading widely among Indonesia's young generation, showing just how excited they are to work overseas.
Right. But it is actually a response to a mixed dissatisfactions, whether about work conditions in Indonesia, lack of job opportunities, or even government policies. Also, the attraction of this better life abroad as it is circulating on social media from the lives of Indonesian migrant vloggers who showcase their stories in a very positive light. But unfortunately, you know that the stories you hear on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube sometimes only show the sweet side of living abroad.
Totally. Social media can make anything look perfect. But I get what you're saying. It is easy to show the sweet side of a life abroad while hiding the tough parts. Hesti, let's help our audience to get a sense of the big picture. I read in the JANZZ research paper that over 9 million Indonesians were working abroad back in 2017. That's like the entire population of Austria working somewhere else.
That's indeed an interesting paper to read, as you would find some surprising facts just like what you've just mentioned. And Indonesia has the most overseas workers in Southeast Asia, even more than the Philippines, with a number of up to 2.3 million just in 2023.
Right. And what I find even more surprising is that even though Indonesia has roughly 4 times, so to be exact, 3.9 times, more people working overseas than the Philippines, the remittances they sent back home were $19 billion in 2023, compared to $39 billion from the Philippines, so $20 billion more. It highlights that it is not just about the number of people working abroad, but also the kinds of jobs they do, the wages they earn, and how much money they send back home.
Right, there is a lot to reveal behind those numbers. It is the types of jobs, that's where things get interesting actually from these numbers.
Hesti, maybe you can explain why the split between low-skilled and high-skilled work and the bad reputation attached to the name. You have 2 different terms for it, right? One for more blue-collar jobs and one for white-collar jobs.
Yes, you're right. So, well, in the past, most Indonesians abroad have worked in domestic roles, like housemaids, caregivers, or in sectors like agriculture and construction, as called the TKI, or the Indonesian migrant workers in general. And the majority of them are women. But there is a growing number of us in skilled roles, such as engineers, teachers, software developers, what people sometimes call us as the Indonesian diaspora.
And that term, diaspora, is kind of a way of separating from the stigma?
Kind of. Migrant workers still evokes stereotypes back home. People might assume you're doing low-status work, even if you're leading a tech team.
The white paper shows us that Indonesian overseas workers are still dominated by those who work in the low-skilled sector, especially domestic workers. It also puts in context how this phenomenon of working overseas has changed.
Yes, so historically it was organized by the government to meet the needs of coolies or low-wage laborers in plantations. It was the time back to the Dutch colonial government in Indonesia's case that during the independence era, the placement of Indonesian overseas workers was carried out through cooperation between the government and the private parties, both at the national and international levels.
And how is it now? It is not so regulated, right? Now there is these job agents and agencies.
Well, it is regulated through BLK or pre-departure and training institutions with various mechanisms like G2G, B2G, private to government, private to private, or B2B. But there are still some unofficial placement of migrant workers, which is the hardest one to control. It is beyond the reach of the authorities to monitor their movements. For example, personal contract extensions often go off the track. The free visa scheme for visitors in Southeast Asia allow the candidate to freely move within the regions, and also some cross-border mobilities between the neighboring countries.
I see. That's actually very interesting. One thing that also stood out in the paper was how recruitment works. It is not always just apply online, get a visa, go.
Oh, no. There are layers, especially for low-skilled workers. The path often goes, as I said, through local brokers or agencies. And sometimes people don't pay up front, but their first 6 months' salary gets cut in half, or they simply charge them big amounts to get them very low-paid jobs.
Yeah, this is really bad, and this part of the paper really affected me. How strict the conditions are, especially for housemates.
Yeah, imagine working almost around the clock from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and the only time you leave the house is to carry your employer's groceries, not being allowed to have a phone call or to be in touch with your family.
And earning way less than the men that have the lack of work at the construction work. Hard to believe information. The paper also mentioned that even in modern times, education is a huge filter, with over 50% of workers only having an elementary or junior high school education.
Yes, and most have only an elementary school, or we call it as Hesti. Therefore, in many cases, migrant workers are illiterate with the regulations regarding immigration matters, for example, or not being knowledgeable enough to know what their tasks, rights, and obligations are. That's what makes them vulnerable to discrimination and marginalization.
Also, we see personal cases like Solikun's and Delicious stories. At 46 and 52 years old, respectively, they cannot go back abroad to work as construction workers because of age regulations that limit it to those aged 40.
See, that's the irony. When they still have the desire to work abroad, but the contract and age requirements are limited. For example, the typical working contract is usually within a 2 years period. Then one should reapply for an extension. However, it requires a certain age limit. It's not like once you apply, you get a job and you get a permanent contract.
Right. Then, also in the same paper, we hear stories, maybe from a more younger generation of Indonesians, that, like in your case, they managed to go out because of studies or other reasons, and then they stayed. But this also has a dark side that no one shares, right?
Well, not that dark, actually. But what a long journey it has been, Laura. From Indonesia to Thailand, then to Switzerland. And you're right, it's barely talked about, especially that particular tough part of the process to be able to eventually kabur aja dulu. As you know, the bar for high-skilled is high. University degree, several years of experience in highly qualified roles, language skills, and visas have a cost. For you with translation and legalization of diplomas, and the company hiring you, it's a lot of paperwork, and as well as permit fees, especially when it involves hiring a lawyer, because whether you like it or not, I'm considered as a third national here in Switzerland. And this also puts me in a somewhat insecure position because the work permit is tied with the employer, meaning that if I lose the job, I lose the visa.
Yeah. So it is within reach, but only if every single piece falls perfectly into place.
Exactly.
That is hard and far from ideal. This year, 2025, Switzerland will issue only 8,500 long and short-term permits to all non-EU EFTA nationals combined. And the quota is usually exhausted by the end of May. So all exhausted by now.
See, that sounds even harder, but we manage, fortunately. Things are settled now with work, family, and everything just the way we expected.
Your story is a high-skill path, but in the same paper, we have other stories who worked abroad and used their earnings to build a house back home. Different worlds, same route, earning abroad to invest in the future.
That's true. Whether you are teaching in Switzerland or harvesting palm oil in Malaysia, you're still sending remittances home. That's how most of us Indonesian migrant workers or diaspora do. And those remittances are actually one of the major drivers for Indonesia's economy.
And yet, there are still risks, right? From exploitative recruitment to visa limitations.
Obviously. And this is where I think technology can play a role, making job searches transparent, showing the real requirements, even recommending upskilling paths. That's what we work on at JANZZ.technology. Not just matching people to jobs, but also helping them see where their skill gaps are and how to fill them.
So instead of kabur aja dulu, run away first, it could be prepare first, run later.
Yes, I love that. Hashtag that. Siap-siap aja dulu.
I'll do. So if you had to give one piece of advice to someone in Indonesia thinking about working abroad, what would it be?
Well, I get this question a lot. And I think the very first thing is simply to be prepared. Don't just focus on the destination and the daydreaming of those fancy lives you see on the screen, but focus on your toolkit, your skills, your language ability, your adaptability, because that's what will keep you competitive anywhere.
Yes. And maybe think about life after, whether that's returning home or settling abroad, but still investing back home.
That's the point. It is always good to think long term instead of rushing the decision of moving abroad just because it's a trend to run away first. Everything should be calculated, time, energy, money, and it's a big move, especially when it involves your family and your future. And well, life could be hard in Indonesia for some, but life abroad could be hard too. So again, choose your heart. The choice is yours.
Well said. So today we've tried to approximate you to the realities behind the numbers, the courage, the sacrifice, the strategy of Indonesians working far from home. If you are interested in reading the white paper, which I really recommend, Far From Home, Stories of Indonesian Migrant Workers. I will leave you the link in the podcast description or just go to our website. You just have to fill in a quick form and we'll send it to you. Hesti, any final input?
As you know, we've seen that with the right preparation and the right tools, you can shape your own story. You can begin that journey, no matter where you start. Such movement, kabur aja dulu, and the trend on social media needs to be interpreted and accommodated positively, both by the Indonesian government and also by the governments of many developed countries such as Japan, Austria, and Germany, which are starting to face labor shortages in their various vital sectors.
Right. And this is very interesting because we will have a podcast on labor shortages and mismatches very soon too. So stay tuned. Hesti, thank you so much again.
A pleasure, Laura. Thank you.
If you're curious to learn more, check out JANZZ.technology. We are building smarter, more transparent ways for people to find work, upskill, and connect globally. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.